My name is Eliza. I'm 27 years old. And that Tuesday night at 7:15 p.m. was the moment I realized my husband would rather humiliate me in front of his family than stand beside me. Picture the scene if you can stomach it. The dining room where I'd spent 3 hours preparing what I thought was a beautiful meal. Roast beef, garlic mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, nothing fancy, but made with care. Made with love, though I'm choking on that word now. His parents sat there like judges at a tribunal, forks poised, waiting to render their verdict on my worthiness as a wife. And then he said it. Those words that still burn in my throat like acid. You call this food? My parents aren't strays, don't feed them scraps. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum that sucked all the oxygen from the room, all the warmth from my chest, all the hope from my foolish heart. His mother's lips curled into something that might have been a smile if smiles could draw blood. His father didn't even look up from his plate, just pushed the food around like it was contaminated. But my husband? My husband looked right at me when he said it. Eye to eye. Soul to soul. And in that moment, I saw exactly what I meant to him. Nothing. Less than nothing. I was an embarrassment to be corrected, a mistake to be managed, a wife to be put in her place. Before we dive deeper into this knife wound of a story, I need to know something. Drop a comment below and tell me your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise painting the sky in the UK, midnight swallowing New York whole, lazy afternoon sun in Canada, or evening shadows creeping across Australia, I want to know. Don't just sit there consuming my pain like entertainment. Tell me where in the world you are witnessing this. Now, let's rip this wound wide open. The aftermath was worse than the moment itself. That's what they don't tell you about public humiliation. It echoes. It reverberates through every corner of your life until you can't escape the sound of your own shame. I slept on the couch that night. Not because he told me to, but because the thought of lying next to him made my skin crawl. The dinner sat untouched on the table until morning, congealing into something that looked exactly like how I felt, cold, unwanted, forgotten. The smell of that roast beef mixed with my burned dignity created a stench that seemed to permeate the walls. By Wednesday morning, the neighbors were already whispering. Mrs. Henderson from next door suddenly had a reason to water her garden at the exact moment I stepped outside to get the mail. Her eyes followed me like searchlights, hunting for signs of the breakdown she'd heard through our thin walls. The mailman, usually chatty, suddenly found his shoes fascinating when I approached. "Good morning, Eliza," he mumbled, shoving letters into my hands like they were contaminated. Even my so-called friends turned into vultures, circling the carcass of my marriage. Sarah called Thursday afternoon, her voice dripping with that particular brand of false concern that tastes like poison honey. "Honey, are you okay? I heard about dinner the other night. Why doesn't he ever defend you? Why doesn't he defend me?" As if I hadn't been asking myself that question for 3 years. As if I hadn't made excuses for his silence every time his family treated me like hired help. As if I hadn't convinced myself that love meant swallowing your dignity until it dissolved completely. The house felt different now. Every room held the echo of that dinner, every corner whispered reminders of my inadequacy. The kitchen, once my sanctuary, became a crime scene. I couldn't look at the stove without seeing a sneer. Couldn't open the refrigerator without hearing scraps bounce off the walls like a curse. The clattering of dishes as I finally cleaned up that ruined meal sounded like broken bones. Each plate I scraped felt like scraping away another piece of myself. The silence after his family left, that thick, suffocating quiet, had settled into the house like fog, making everything unclear, making me question what I'd seen, what I'd heard, what I'd felt. But shame? Shame builds. It doesn't dissipate like fog. It accumulates like sediment, layer after layer, until you're drowning in it. Until you start believing you deserved it. Until you start thinking maybe you really can't cook, maybe you really aren't good enough, maybe you really are just serving scraps. If you've ever been humiliated by someone you trusted, someone who was supposed to protect you, someone who promised to love you through better and worse, type "I feel you" in the comments. And if you can hear this story and not subscribe, if you can witness this destruction and just scroll past like it doesn't matter, honestly, why? What kind of person consumes someone's breaking point and gives nothing back? Friday brought the call that changed everything. I was sitting in that same cursed kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, when the phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something, maybe desperation, maybe the hope for any voice that wasn't dripping with pity, made me answer. Mrs. Eliza Morrison? This is James Whitfield from Whitfield and Associates. I've been trying to reach you regarding your late Aunt Margaret's estate. Aunt Margaret. I hadn't thought about her in years. She was my mother's sister, a woman who lived 3 states away and sent Christmas cards with crisp $20 bills inside. A woman who lived alone in what my mother always called that big old house in the country. A woman who, apparently, had just turned my world upside down. I'm sorry for your loss, the lawyer continued, his voice professional but not unkind. Your aunt passed 3 weeks ago. Natural causes. She left very specific instructions that you were to be contacted immediately upon the settling of her affairs. 3 weeks. She'd been gone 3 weeks, and I hadn't even known. While I was serving scraps and swallowing humiliation, Aunt Margaret was being buried in some cemetery I'd probably never visited. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What does this have to do with me? Mrs. Morrison, your aunt has left you her entire estate. The house, approximately 40 acres of land, and, this is quite significant, her shares in the family catering business, Morrison Family Foods. The phone nearly slipped from my hands. Morrison Family Foods. Even I knew that name. They catered every major event in the county, weddings, corporate functions, political fundraisers. They were the golden standard, the company everyone wanted for their special occasions. I'm sorry, did you say shares? Controlling shares, Mrs. Morrison. 51%. Your aunt was quite successful and quite deliberate in her bequests. There's more we need to discuss, but I'd prefer to do so in person. Can you come to my office Monday morning? I hung up the phone and sat in that kitchen for an hour, maybe 2. The same kitchen where I'd been deemed inadequate just days before. The irony was so sharp I could taste blood. The very family who had mocked my cooking, who had treated me like I was serving garbage to their precious palates, suddenly needed me. Because Morrison Family Foods held contracts with half the businesses in town, including the law firm where my husband worked, including the country club where his parents preened like peacocks, including the political circles they moved in like they owned them. When my husband came home that evening, I was still sitting at the kitchen table, the lawyer's business card spinning between my fingers like a tiny tornado. You're up late, he said, loosening his tie like he was the one who'd had a hard day. Like he hadn't spent the week pretending nothing had happened. Like he hadn't watched his parents humiliate me and joined in for sport. I got a call today. He paused, something in my tone making him look at me properly for the first time in days. What kind of call? My aunt died. I inherited her estate. His face went through a series of expressions, confusion, calculation, something that might have been hope. Eliza, that's... I'm sorry for your loss. Was she close to you? Close enough to leave me everything, including her business. That's when his phone started ringing. And ringing. And ringing. His parents, suddenly remembering they had a daughter-in-law. His boss, suddenly interested in our weekend plans. His social circle, suddenly wondering if we'd like to join them for dinner. Would you forgive him at this point? Would you believe his sudden concern was real, or would you make him crawl through the broken glass of his own making? Let me know below, because I'm curious how far your mercy extends. The next week was a masterclass in how quickly people's attitudes change when the power shifts. My husband, who hadn't apologized for the dinner disaster, suddenly became the most attentive spouse in the world. He brought me coffee in bed, coffee he'd never made before, and asked about my plans for the day like he actually cared about the answer. But I had stopped talking. Not completely, not dramatically. I just stopped offering information. Stopped explaining my feelings. Stopped trying to make him understand what he'd done to me. I answered direct questions with the minimum required words and let silence fill the spaces where my chatter used to live. And that silence? It terrified him. "Eliza, we should talk about this inheritance," he said Wednesday morning, hovering in the kitchen doorway like he was afraid to enter my space. "Should we?" I poured my coffee, added cream, stirred slowly. Each movement deliberate, each second stretched like taffy. "I think we should discuss how this changes things. For us. For our future. Our future." The same future he'd been willing to sacrifice for his parents' approval just days ago. The same future that apparently only mattered now that it came with money and influence attached. His phone buzzed. Text message. Then another. Then a call he declined. The vultures were circling and they were hungry. "Your parents have been calling," I said, not looking at him. "I know." I haven't answered. "Why not?" He shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the question. "I wanted to talk to you first." How considerate. The sarcasm hung in the air like smoke. He opened his mouth to respond, closed it, tried again. "Eliza, I know you're angry about the other night." Angry? I finally looked at him, and whatever he saw in my eyes made him step back. "You think I'm angry?" Yes. "I'm not angry, David. Angry would require me to care about your opinion. Angry would mean your words still had the power to hurt me." His face went pale. "What are you saying?" But I was already walking away, leaving him standing in that kitchen with his questions and his fear and his sudden desperate need for my forgiveness. The calls from his family started that afternoon. First his mother, her voice sticky with false sweetness. "Eliza, darling, I've been thinking about you. How are you holding up with this loss? We should get together soon." I let it go to voicemail. Then his father, gruff and uncomfortable. "Eliza, it's Robert. I wanted to offer my condolences. If there's anything we can do to help." Voicemail. His sister, his brother, even his grandmother who hadn't spoken to me since our wedding. All suddenly concerned about my well-being. All suddenly available for coffee, for lunch, for long heart-to-heart conversations about grief and family and how much they valued me. I saved every message. Not because I planned to return their calls, but because I wanted to remember the exact tone of their desperation. I wanted to preserve the sound of people who had never respected me suddenly scrambling for my attention. My lawyer friend, Jennifer, called Thursday evening. We'd known each other since college, and she was one of the few people whose concern felt genuine. "I heard about your aunt. I'm sorry, Eliza. But also, holy shit, do you know what you've inherited? I'm starting to understand. Morrison Family Foods is huge. They cater every political event, every high society wedding, every corporate function worth attending. Your husband's law firm uses them exclusively. His parents' country club has an exclusive contract with them." I know. "Eliza, you could destroy these people if you wanted to." The words hung between us like a loaded gun. Could I? Would I? The power was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. "Sometimes silence is the loudest weapon," I told her, surprising myself with the words. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to let them dig their own graves. And then I'm going to decide whether I want to bury them in them. If you think silence speaks louder than words, if you've ever wielded quiet like a sword, comment silence. And if you're still watching without subscribing, if you're consuming this story like free entertainment while I bleed my truth for you, I have to ask, why punish yourself by missing the ending? Why rob yourself of the satisfaction of seeing justice served? Saturday morning brought the invitation I'd been expecting. Hand-delivered by my husband, written in his mother's careful script on cream-colored paper that probably cost more than most people's grocery budgets. "Dearest Eliza," it began, and I had to swallow a laugh at the sudden endearment. "We would be honored if you would join us for dinner Sunday evening. A small family gathering to properly welcome you back into our fold and offer our sincere condolences on your recent loss. We hope you'll allow us to support you during this difficult time. Support me. These people who had sat in my dining room and watched their son humiliate me now wanted to support me. These people who had never once invited me anywhere without making it clear I was an obligation now wanted to welcome me into their fold. Are you going to go? David asked, hovering near the kitchen table where I sat reading his mother's carefully crafted manipulation. Yes. His relief was visible, pathetic. Good. That's good. They really do want to make things right, Eliza. I'm sure they do. But he missed the edge in my voice, too focused on his own salvation to hear the blade being sharpened. Sunday evening, I stood in front of my closet for an hour, choosing my armor. Not the soft pastels his mother preferred, not the conservative cuts that made me blend into wallpaper. I chose a dress the color of fresh blood, fitted and confident, with heels that announced my arrival with every step. I did my makeup carefully, dramatically, like war paint. I was no longer the timid girl who apologized for taking up space. The drive to their house felt like approaching a battlefield. Every turn of the wheel took me closer to the confrontation I'd been rehearsing in my head for days. The house loomed ahead, all Georgian columns and manicured perfection, a monument to old money and older prejudices. I parked in the circular driveway and sat for a moment, gathering my strength. Through the windows, I could see them moving around inside, his mother adjusting flowers, his father polishing already perfect glassware, David pacing like a caged animal. They were nervous. Good. The door opened before I could knock. David, sweating slightly despite the cool evening air. You look beautiful, he said, and for the first time in years, he sounded like he meant it. Thank you. I stepped inside, and the familiar oppression of their home settled around me like a heavy coat. Everything was calculated to intimidate, the soaring ceilings, the antique furniture, the portraits of dead relatives glaring down from gilded frames. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, I wasn't here to be judged. The dining room was set for show, as always. Crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier like trapped stars. China so delicate it looked like it might shatter if you breathed on it too hard. Silver polished to a mirror shine, reflecting distorted versions of ourselves back at us. His mother glided forward, arms extended like we were old friends reuniting after a pleasant separation rather than what we really were, strangers who had been forced into the same family tree. Eliza, darling, you look absolutely radiant. Grief becomes you. What a thing to say. What a perfectly inappropriate thing to say. But I smiled, the expression cutting across my face like a blade. Thank you, Margaret. You look exactly the same. She flinched slightly at the backhanded compliment, but recovered quickly. Please sit. We've prepared your favorites. My favorites. As if she had any idea what I actually liked, as if she'd ever bothered to ask. But I took my seat, not the one at the foot of the table where I usually sat like a subordinate, but the chair to the right of the head. The power seat. David's usual spot. He hesitated for a moment, then took the chair across from me. The family arranged themselves around the table like pieces on a chessboard, everyone acutely aware that the game had changed, but nobody quite sure of the new rules. If you've ever dreamed of walking back into a room where they doubted you, stronger than ever, where you held all the cards they thought they owned, drop a fire emoji in the comments. Because this is what power feels like when it's earned through pain. The first course arrived. Soup so pretentious it had a French name I couldn't pronounce. We ate in relative silence, the only sounds the delicate clink of spoons against bowls and the grandfather clock in the hallway counting down the seconds to my reckoning. So, his father finally said, clearing his throat like he was about to make a speech. We wanted to talk to you about this inheritance business. Did you? My voice was steady, curious, giving nothing away. He shifted in his chair, clearly expecting more reaction. It's quite a windfall. Quite unexpected. For you, perhaps. His mother leaned forward, her smile bright and sharp as broken glass. What Robert means is that we're so happy for you, dear. And we want you to know that we're here to help you navigate this new responsibility. Managing a business can be overwhelming, especially for someone without experience. Someone without experience. As if my 3 years of marriage to their son hadn't taught me exactly how to deal with manipulative, condescending people. As if watching them operate hadn't been a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. How thoughtful of you to offer. We have connections, David's father continued, emboldened by what he mistook for receptiveness. People who could help you manage the transition. Financial advisors, business managers. People who understand how these things work. People you trust. Exactly. The main course arrived lamb that had probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. We carved and chewed and pretended this was a normal family dinner instead of what it really was, a negotiation disguised as a meal. The thing is, his mother said, dabbing her lips with a napkin that probably had a thread count higher than my sheets, family businesses can be so complicated. So many moving parts, so many relationships to maintain. It might be easier for everyone if the business stayed in more experienced hands. There it was. The offer I'd been waiting for. They wanted to buy me out, to take control of the very business that now held their social standing hostage. They wanted to return to the status quo where they held the power and I held the scraps. You're suggesting I sell? It would be a very generous offer, his father added quickly. More than fair market value. Enough to set you up for life. Set me up for life. As if that was what this was about. As if money could buy back the dignity they'd stolen from me. As if a check could erase the memory of being called inadequate in front of people who mattered to me. You know what's funny? I said, setting down my fork and looking around the table at their expectant faces. A week ago, you told me I served scraps. You said I wasn't good enough to feed your family. You made it clear that my cooking, my efforts, my very presence at your table was an embarrassment. The silence that followed was different from the dinner silence a week ago. This wasn't the quiet of judgment being passed. This was the silence of people realizing they'd made a catastrophic error in calculation. Eliza, his mother started, her voice suddenly gentle, conciliatory. That was a misunderstanding. Emotions were high. Things were said that shouldn't have been. No. The word cut through her explanation like a cleaver through bone. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was exactly what you meant. You wanted me small so you could feel big. You wanted me grateful so you could feel generous. You wanted me lesser so you could feel superior. David reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of mine. Eliza, please. We're family. We can work through this. Family? I looked at him, this man I'd married, this man who'd promised to love and protect me, this man who'd watched his parents tear me apart and never said a word. When was I family, David? When you let them mock my cooking. When you agreed that I served scraps. When you chose their approval over my dignity. He opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. Here's what's really funny about tonight. You're all being so kind, so supportive, so concerned about my well-being. You're treating me like I matter, like my feelings are important, like I'm worthy of your respect. And all it took was money. All it took was power. All it took was something you needed from me. His father's face was flushed, whether from anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. Now see here, young lady. No, you see here. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor like nails on a chalkboard. I know exactly what Morrison Family Foods means to this community. I know exactly how many contracts you hold, how many events you cater, how many important people depend on you for their special occasions. I walked around the table slowly, my heels clicking against the floor like a countdown timer. I know that your law firm, David, has an exclusive catering contract with Morrison Family Foods. I know that your country club's membership agreement includes catered events. I know that half the political fundraisers in this county depend on my company to make them look good. My company. The words tasted like victory. I also know that all of those contracts are up for renewal this year. And I know that as the majority shareholder, I have final approval on all business relationships. The color drained from David's face. His mother's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide her growing pallor. His father's hands shook slightly as he reached for his wine glass. "So here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice steady as a surgeon's scalpel. "I'm going to take over active management of Morrison Family Foods. I'm going to review every contract, every relationship, every business arrangement my aunt had in place. And I'm going to decide, on a case-by-case basis, whether those relationships serve my interests." "Eliza," his mother whispered, "you can't be serious." "Oh, but I am. You see, funny thing about scraps, they can grow into full meals when you know how to cook them properly. And it turns out, I'm a much better cook than any of you ever gave me credit for." I moved to the head of the table, to the seat of power his father usually occupied, and placed my hands on the back of the chair. "The scraps you despised now own your feast. Would you have walked out then, or would you have stayed to watch them squirm? Would you have twisted the knife deeper, or would you have been satisfied with drawing blood? Comment below and tell me exactly how far your mercy extends." The aftermath was more satisfying than I could have imagined. By Monday morning, the phone calls started. Not to me. I'd made it clear I wasn't taking calls from anyone with the last name Morrison, but to David. His firm's senior partners wanted to know about the catering contract. The country club board was asking questions. Political allies were suddenly concerned about their upcoming fundraisers. By Tuesday, the local business journal had picked up the story. "Local woman inherits food service empire," read the headline, with a picture of me taken at the lawyer's office, looking confident and composed. The article mentioned the exclusive contracts, the political connections, the social implications of the inheritance. By Wednesday, the whispers had turned into full conversations. People who had never spoken to me before suddenly knew my name. Checkout clerks at the grocery store asked if I was that Morrison woman. The mailman, who had avoided eye contact just days earlier, now tipped his hat and asked about my plans for the business. David's family was unraveling like a cheap sweater. His brother called Thursday afternoon, his voice tight with panic. "Eliza, we need to talk. The Political Action Committee is threatening to pull out of their contract unless we can guarantee stability in the catering arrangements." I let it go to voicemail. His sister tried Friday morning, her usual condescension replaced with naked desperation. "Eliza, I don't know what David told you, but we've always supported your marriage. We've always welcomed you into the family. Surely we can work something out." Voicemail. By the weekend, even his grandmother had called. 92 years old and sharp as a tack, she cut straight to the heart of the matter. "Child, I know my family hasn't always been kind to you, but destroying us won't heal whatever they broke. What do you want? What will it take?" I almost picked up that call. Almost. But I wasn't ready to negotiate yet. I was still enjoying the sound of their world cracking apart. The most delicious part was watching them turn on each other. David's brother blamed his parents for the dinner incident. His parents blamed David for not controlling his wife better. His sister blamed everyone for not seeing this coming. 3 generations of careful social climbing undone by their collective arrogance. The local newspaper ran a follow-up story Thursday. Morrison Family Foods faces uncertain future as contracts come under review. They interviewed several clients, all carefully diplomatic, but clearly nervous about their upcoming events. The mayor mentioned his concerns about the annual 4th of July celebration. The Chamber of Commerce wondered aloud about their holiday gala. But the most satisfying piece appeared in the weekend edition of the social page, a column written by Mrs. Adelaide Thornton, the unofficial queen of local society gossip. She had attended David's parents' dinner parties for decades, had been present at my public humiliation the week before, had witnessed the whole ugly scene. This reporter has learned that sometimes the most elegant revenge is simply allowing people to face the consequences of their own actions, she wrote. When we treat others as disposable, we shouldn't be surprised when they dispose of us in return. If karma ever hit back at someone in your life, if you've ever watched someone who hurt you face the natural consequences of their cruelty, tell me your story in the comments. And for those still not subscribed, seriously, are you rooting for the villains here? Are you hoping I forgive and forget? Are you waiting for me to be the bigger person while they face no consequences for their actions? Monday morning, I walked into the offices of Morrison Family Foods for the first time as the owner. The building was smaller than I'd expected, but beautifully maintained, with large windows overlooking the main street and a kitchen that would have made any chef weep with envy. The staff was waiting, 12 employees who had worked for my aunt for years, who knew every recipe, every client preference, every detail that made the business successful. They looked nervous, uncertain about their future under new management. "Good morning," I said, standing in the main workspace where industrial ovens hummed and prep tables gleamed under fluorescent lights. "I'm Eliza Morrison, and I'm here to learn." That's what I spent the week doing, learning. I watched the prep cooks dice vegetables with mechanical precision. I observed the pastry chef create wedding cakes that looked like architectural marvels. I studied the front-of-house team as they planned events with military precision. And I learned that my aunt had built something beautiful. Not just a business, but a community. These people didn't just work together. They cared about each other, supported each other, created something bigger than the sum of their parts. By Thursday, I'd made my first decision. I promoted the head chef, Maria Gonzalez, to general manager. She'd been with the company for 8 years, knew every aspect of the operation, and had the respect of every employee. "But what about the contracts?" she asked during our meeting. "There are a lot of nervous clients out there." "Let them be nervous," I said. "Anxiety makes people honest about what they really value." Friday afternoon, James Whitfield called me to his office for the final paperwork signing. The inheritance was officially, legally, irrevocably mine. As I signed the last document, he looked at me with something that might have been approval. "Your aunt would be proud," he said. "She always said you had more steel in your spine than people gave you credit for." She said that. She said a lot of things. She kept track of your life more than you knew. She saw how you were treated, and she didn't like it. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Aunt Margaret had been watching, had been caring, had been planning this moment long before I knew I needed saving. That evening, David cornered me in our kitchen, the same kitchen where this all began, where I'd been serving scraps to people who couldn't appreciate a feast. "Eliza, this has gone far enough. My job is in jeopardy. My parents' reputation is being destroyed. We need to find a solution. I need to. I'm asking for your help. You're asking for my help." I turned to face him fully, this man who had watched me be humiliated and said nothing, who had chosen his family's approval over his wife's dignity, who was now discovering that silence had consequences. "When I needed your help, where were you?" "I know I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" The word came out like a bark of laughter. "You made choices, David. You chose to let them tear me down. You chose to agree that I serve scraps. You chose their respect over mine. I was trying to keep the peace." "Whose peace?" "Not mine. I was dying inside that dining room, and you were worried about keeping the peace." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing, but now just looked pathetic. "What do you want me to do? Grovel? Beg? I'll do whatever it takes. I want you to understand something. The woman who used to beg for your approval, who used to apologize for taking up space, who used to accept scraps and call them love, she's gone. You killed her that night at dinner. And the woman standing here now? She doesn't need your apology." Saturday morning brought the moment I'd been building toward all week. David's parents requested a meeting, not at their house this time, but at my lawyer's office. Neutral territory. They arrived looking older than I remembered, as if the stress of the past week had aged them years. "Eliza," his mother began, her voice carefully modulated, "we want to apologize. Properly this time. We were wrong to speak to you the way we did. We were wrong to treat you as less than family. You were. We're hoping we can find a way forward. Together." His father leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped in front of him like a supplicant. "We're prepared to make this right. Whatever it takes." "What does that look like to you?" They exchanged glances, clearly having rehearsed this conversation. Public apology, his mother said. In the newspaper, at the next community event, wherever you think is appropriate. Full acknowledgement of our mistakes. And financial compensation, his father added. For the pain we caused, for the humiliation. You think you can buy my forgiveness? We think we should pay for our mistakes, his mother said carefully. I sat back in my chair, studying these people who had spent a week learning what it felt like to be powerless, what it felt like to need something from someone who had every reason to say no. You know what the real tragedy is? I said finally. If you had just been kind to me, not even warm, just basically decent, we wouldn't be here. If you had treated me like a human being instead of an inconvenience, you'd still have your contracts, your social standing, your comfortable little world. We know that now, his father said. We know we were wrong. But you don't know why you were wrong. You think this is about dinner, about food, about one bad night. This is about 3 years of being treated like I was lucky to be tolerated. This is about every holiday where you made it clear I didn't belong, every gathering where you spoke around me instead of to me, every time you made David choose between your approval and my dignity. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant sound of traffic outside. You're right, his mother whispered. We're right to lose everything. No, I said, standing up. You're not right to lose everything. You're not special enough for that kind of dramatic justice. You're just going to face the natural consequences of treating people poorly. Nothing more, nothing less. I moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at them. I haven't decided what I'm going to do about the contracts yet. But I want you to understand something, whatever I decide, it won't be about revenge. It will be about what's best for my business, my employees, and my future. You'll be footnotes in those considerations, not the main story. And then I left them sitting there, two people who had spent their entire lives believing their approval mattered, finally learning that sometimes it doesn't. Would you have walked out too? Or would you have stayed to watch them grovel? Would you have demanded more apologies? Or would you have been satisfied knowing they finally understood their place in your world? Comment below and tell me how much mercy you have left after being broken. The courtroom on Monday morning was smaller than I'd expected, more administrative than dramatic. Judge Patricia Williams presided over the formal transfer of business ownership, a routine procedure that felt anything but routine to me. Ms. Morrison, she said, looking over the paperwork through reading glasses that had seen decades of legal documents, do you understand that accepting full ownership of Morrison Family Foods makes you responsible for all contracts, debts, and obligations currently held by the company? I do, Your Honor. And do you understand that this transfer is permanent and irrevocable? I do. David sat in the back of the courtroom, uninvited but not barred from attending. I could feel his presence like a weight on my shoulders, but I didn't turn around. This moment wasn't about him. It wasn't about his family or their contracts or their desperate attempts to maintain their social standing. This was about me becoming the woman I should have been allowed to be all along. Very well. Judge Williams signed the final documents with a flourish. Congratulations, Ms. Morrison. You are now the sole owner and operator of Morrison Family Foods. The gavel came down with a sound like a door closing on my old life. As I gathered my papers and prepared to leave, David approached. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his choices. Eliza, can we talk? We're talking. I mean really talk. About us. About our marriage. About what happens now. I looked at him, this man I'd loved, this man I'd married, this man who had been willing to sacrifice my dignity for his family's approval. He looked hopeful, like he thought there was still a chance to fix what he'd broken. David, do you know what I realized sitting in that courtroom? What? I spent 3 years trying to become the woman you and your family wanted me to be. Quiet, grateful, small enough to fit in the spaces you allowed me. And I almost succeeded. I almost convinced myself that scraps were enough, that being tolerated was the same as being loved. That's not what I wanted. It's exactly what you wanted. And you got it for a while. But here's the thing about trying to make yourself smaller. Eventually, you forget that you were ever bigger. Eventually, you start believing that small is all you deserve. I stepped closer to him, close enough to see the desperation in his eyes. But I remembered David. I remembered that I was never the problem. My cooking wasn't the problem. My presence wasn't the problem. The problem was that you and your family needed someone to look down on to feel good about yourselves. I love you, Eliza. The words hung in the air between us like a lie looking for someone to believe it. You love the idea of me. You love the convenience of me. You love what I represented, a wife who wouldn't cause problems, who would accept whatever treatment you offered, who would be grateful for the bare minimum. I adjusted my purse on my shoulder, a gesture that felt like putting on armor. I cooked my own destiny, David. And you'll never taste it. His face crumpled like paper, but I was already walking away, my heels clicking against the marble floor of the courthouse like applause. If you loved that line, if you felt that moment of absolute finality, subscribe right now. Don't let this channel be another story you regret missing. Don't rob yourself of the satisfaction of witnessing justice served and strength reclaimed. I walked out of that courthouse into bright September sunlight that felt like redemption. The courthouse steps stretched before me like a red carpet leading to the rest of my life, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. My phone buzzed with messages, reporters wanting quotes about the business transition, employees asking about our Monday staff meeting, clients nervously inquiring about their upcoming events. But I turned it off and just stood there for a moment, breathing in the crisp air of possibility. They had told me I wasn't enough. They had told me I served scraps. They had told me I should be grateful for the bare minimum of human decency. Today, I realized they were wrong about everything except one thing. I wasn't enough for them. I was too much. Too strong, too resilient, too capable of rising from the ashes of their cruelty and building something beautiful from the ruins of their expectations. The woman who had sat at that dinner table a week ago, absorbing their mockery like it was deserved, was gone. In her place stood someone who knew her worth, someone who wouldn't apologize for taking up space, someone who understood that sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to accept less than you deserve. I thought about Aunt Margaret, this woman I'd barely known but who had known me well enough to see my potential, to believe I could handle the responsibility she'd left me. She had given me more than a business, she had given me the tools to build a life on my own terms. As I walked down those courthouse steps, I felt the weight of the past 3 years lifting from my shoulders like a heavy coat I no longer needed. Behind me lay a marriage built on the quicksand of other people's approval. Ahead lay uncertainty, challenge, the hard work of running a business and rebuilding a life. But for the first time in years, I was walking toward something instead of away from something. For the first time in years, I was choosing my direction instead of following someone else's map. The sun caught the windows of the Morrison Family Foods building in the distance, and I smiled. Not the careful, apologetic smile I'd worn for 3 years, but something wild and free and completely my own. I had work to do. What would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven? Would you have been the bigger person? Would you have turned the other cheek and pretended cruelty could be washed away with apologies? Be honest in the comments below. Tell me exactly how much mercy you have left after being broken. Tell me how much grace you'd offer to people who spent years making you feel small. And if you can watch this entire story, this journey from humiliation to triumph, from scraps to sovereignty, and not subscribe, then tell me, why turn away from strength when it's right in front of you? Why reject the satisfaction of watching someone reclaim their power after it was stolen from them? This is what resilience looks like. This is what self-worth sounds like when it finally finds its voice. This is what happens when someone who has been fed scraps finally learns they deserve the whole feast. Subscribe. Because stories like this, stories of people who refuse to stay broken, are exactly what this world needs more of. And you deserve to witness every moment of that transformation. They once told me I wasn't enough. Today, I know I was always too much for them to handle. And that, my friends, is exactly as it should be.